Hey guys, today I'm going to be discussing the light dependent reaction, which is one of two um, stages of photosynthesis. And let's get started on where it begins. What we have right here is an organelle of a plant cell called the chloroplast. Remember, plants are gonna use a light source and process that um, into energy for itself and even make byproducts. And using the sun as a light source, we have the thylakoid. Thylakoid is a structure within the chloroplast, and it's this oval structure right here, and they're stacked on top of each other too as well, creating the granum, and they're connected by the lamella, and the inside is called the lumen. So let's get more in depth with thylakoid. So thylakoid is, remember, it's the circle right here, not the stack, but the circle. But the thylakoid this is going to be the thylakoid membrane, and the white part is going to be the lumen. Remember, we saw the lumen? It's going to be the open space on the bottom. But the membrane is important because it is what processes the initial energy source in sun. And these two columns are the photosystem 1, photosystem 2, and we'll get to naming everything as we go through. So, what happens? Let me get my pen out. Okay, so light energy, this is the yellow lines right here, hits the plant cell and the thylakoid, and so in the form of photons. So as photon hits the cell, it energizes these electrons in the center called the chlorophyll reaction center. And these electrons get energized, and this burst of energy allows it to move. And we have these dot lines right here, and that's where I'm going to show you guys the actual electron transport chain in which it moves through. But it moves through this electron transport chain and eventually lands in the photosystem 1. Now before we get into photosystem 1, let's talk about what happens when it goes through the actual transport chain. So photosystem 2 loses electrons. But remember, energy flowing is always going to be circular, it's a cycle. You're going to get something back in return. So in a dicolloid, hydrogen splits. So you have two hydrogen ions, half of an oxygen ion, which forms with another half of another oxygen ion to form O2. Oops. Sorry. My pen got a little crazy, but it forms O2. O2 is one of the byproducts of photosynthesis, and we as humans use O2 to breathe. It's oxygen. Crucial to us. Now let's look into forming the second byproduct. So we saw that the electrons move through this area right here, and it hits this protein right here. Oh, sorry. Before it hits these electron acceptors, and these are pretty much safeguards that allow it to pass through the chain. They grab the electrons and guide them through the transport chain. But it hits this protein right here, and what does that do? It allows hydrogen ions to enter the lumen through the protein from the stroma of the chloroplast. This is what we call a hydrogen protein gradient. Remember, we learned about gradients in class. You move from high gradient, low gradient, low gradient, high gradient. This moves it from a low gradient stroma. Well, it creates a low gradient stroma, and in return has a high gradient lumen. And this creates potential energy. This burst of hydrogen creates a potential energy in which this structure right here, our ATP synthase, in return will use to, sorry, my camera, will use to transfer hydrogen ions out. It comes in and it goes right back out. This energy it uses, the ATP synthase, allows, remember we're using the hydrogen ion, but it allows phosphate to bond to ADP and create ATP, our second byproduct of photosynthesis. Now our third byproduct. Remember how we have electrons that are still stuck in this photosynthesis 1? Mind you, it's not going to be stuck. this is all happening within nanoseconds. We're just going through it step by step to see how it actually happens. But this is really fast. There's an order, but it doesn't really matter because you wouldn't even realize it. But because light sources hits photosynthesis or photosystem 1 and photosystem 2, the electrons are eventually going to be energized again and move into another electron or secondary electron transport chain. And they will eventually leave, but also grab onto hydrogen ions. Now, the electrons that move across the chain will grab onto hydrogen ions and use the hydrogen ions to bond with NADP to create NADPH, our third and final byproduct of our first stage. Now, there are more stages to, there's a secondary stage which involves ATP and NADPH in the Calvin cycle, which eventually converts into sugar. But we're going through the first light-dependent reaction, which only creates oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. So there you go. Hopefully that helps.